My name is Gavin Trent. I'm 57 years old, and I spent 31 years as a structural engineer for the province of Ontario. Long enough to understand that the things most likely to fail are the ones that look perfectly stable from the outside. A bridge can carry traffic for 20 years and still have a hairline fracture running through its core that nobody noticed because nobody looked. I did not expect that training to become relevant at my son's Christmas dinner table. But here we are. 6 weeks before Christmas, my daughter-in-law sent my wife a list. Before I tell you about the list, I want to tell you who my wife is, because what happened to her only makes sense once you understand that. Her name is Elaine. We've been married 33 years. She taught grade 3 at Hartley Road Public School in Burlington for 26 of those years. Same grade, same building, different room numbers over time, but essentially the same life. She remembered every child's name by the first Friday. She could tell you 20 years later who had struggled with reading, and who had cried quietly on the coat hook bench in September, and who, with the right kind of patience, had opened up by November. She is the most quietly competent and generous person I have ever known. She is also someone who spent most of her adult life making things easier for other people, and who had learned, over decades, to be very good at it without making a production of it. Our son Andrew is 30. He's steady and careful. Works in commercial real estate finance on Bay Street, which suits him. He does his homework before he makes a move. I am proud of him in the particular way a father is proud when his son becomes a man he would also choose to know. Andrew met Camille 2 years ago and married her last summer. Small wedding, 40 people. Elaine spent 2 weekends before the ceremony addressing the envelopes by hand, because Camille had mentioned once that she loved the look of real handwriting on an invitation, and Elaine had heard that and filed it away. That was Elaine. I liked Camille well enough at the start. She was organized, direct, driven, qualities I genuinely respect. She was good at her job in marketing and didn't pretend otherwise. The issue, and I want to be fair about this because it took longer than it should have to name it clearly, was that Camille's directness extended to Elaine in a particular way. She had strong opinions about what Elaine could and should contribute to things, and she expressed those opinions as though the answer were already settled. There was no room in her phrasing for the answer to be no. I noticed it first at Andrew's birthday dinner. A Thursday text to Elaine, 3 days before the weekend. Hey Mom, we're doing a low-key dinner at our place Saturday. Andrew's been going on about your butter chicken all week. Could you bring enough for everyone? Thinking 12 people. No question mark on could you. Already out the door. Already waiting on the step. Elaine made the butter chicken. She also made rice, a cucumber raita, naan from scratch, and a cardamom cake she'd seen in a magazine because she thought Camille might like it. I drove. Nobody said thank you at the table. Camille posted pictures of the spread on Instagram. The caption said she'd been cooking all day. 4 months after that, Camille mentioned they needed someone to keep their cat Biscuit while they were in Montreal for a long weekend. This arrived as a text to Elaine on a Wednesday afternoon. Hey Mom, we leave Friday. Does Biscuit doing okay at yours? Not is it okay if, just is Biscuit doing okay? As though the arrangement had already been filed somewhere Elaine and I hadn't seen. We kept Biscuit. He was a pleasant enough cat, but I said something to Elaine that night about the pattern, and she looked at me the way she sometimes did, patient, a little tired, and said I was being protective. She was right, but I wasn't wrong either. I let it go. I should not have let it go. 6 weeks before Christmas, on a Tuesday evening, I was reading in the living room when Elaine came in from the kitchen holding her phone. She didn't say anything. She just held it out. I read it. The list had 12 items: roast turkey, 12 to 14 pounds, glazed ham, seconds in protein for guests who didn't eat turkey, mashed potatoes for 18, stuffing from scratch, shapes and sausage, roasted root vegetables with maple and thyme, Brussels sprouts, creamed corn, Parker house rolls, homemade, not store-bought, cranberry sauce, fresh, a cheese and charcuterie board for arrivals, 2 pies, butter tart and apple, a Yule log for dessert. Below the list, 18 guests confirmed, Andrew's place, December 25th. She should plan to arrive by 7 a.m. to use the kitchen. I set the phone on the arm of the chair. Then I picked it up and read the last part again. Plan to arrive by 7 a.m. to use the kitchen. Not your kitchen. The kitchen. Like a directive sent to a contractor confirming access to a job site. I looked at Elaine. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, not angry yet, Just very still, in the particular way she went still, when she was deciding how bad something actually was. It was as bad as it looked. "I'll call Andrew," I said. "No," she said it clearly but quietly. "Let me handle it first." She sent a message back. "That's a lot for one person. Can we split some of this with Camille's family?" Camille's reply arrived in under 2 minutes. "Mom, you always make it look so effortless. Honestly, we'd just be in the way. You're so much better at this than anyone else." Elaine read it, set her phone face down on the counter, and didn't say anything else that night. 2 Sundays before Christmas, Andrew had us over for dinner. Takeout Thai, nothing Camille had made. She was honest about not being much of a cook, I'll give her that. The pretense was reserved for other areas. After dinner, Elaine found a pause in the conversation and turned to Camille. "I've been thinking about Christmas. Maybe your sister could do a couple of the sides? Or we could order some things from Pusatteri's. They do a wonderful selection this time of year." Camille laughed. It was a warm laugh on the surface and a decided one underneath. "Mom," she reached over and touched Elaine's arm. "You love doing this, and honestly, nobody does it like you. Don't overthink it." She smiled and looked back at her wine glass. Camille's sister nodded. Her boyfriend looked at his phone. Andrew looked at his spring roll. I watched my son look at his spring roll and say nothing. Not one word. I had raised that boy to speak up when something was wrong. He had apparently left that lesson somewhere between his 20s and now. I kept my face neutral. I had learned on enough project sites and in enough municipal meetings that showing your hand before you know what to do with it is a waste of a good hand. On the drive home along the lakeshore, I said to Elaine, "That is not happening." She looked out at the lake. December, the ice just coming in at the edges. "I know," she said. "Then I already have a plan." I looked at her. She was almost smiling. That night, Elaine called Dorothy. Dorothy had been Elaine's closest friend since their first year teaching together at Hartley Road. 24 years of writing report cards in the same staff room, covering each other's classes in emergencies, surviving the same difficult parent nights, knowing each other the way people do when they've shared a profession that looks easy from the outside and isn't. Dorothy had retired to Saanich, just outside Victoria, 3 years ago. She and Elaine spoke every Sunday morning over FaceTime while I made breakfast. I sat in the kitchen while Elaine was on the phone in the bedroom. When she came out 20 minutes later, her face was different, settled, like a decision had already taken hold and put down roots. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface. "Dorothy invited us for Christmas," she said. "Her back garden, her grandmother's roast chicken with lemon and rosemary, just the 3 of us." I said, "I'm in." She looked at me. "Just like that?" "Elaine." I folded my hands. "Our daughter-in-law sent you a work order for 12 dishes and 18 people. Our son watched her do it and said nothing. Dorothy is offering you a garden in Victoria." I paused. "What exactly is the decision here?" She exhaled. A long, slow exhale, like something that had been held in for weeks finally released. She pulled the notepad across the table, wrote a few lines, folded it, set it beside her mug. Then she opened her laptop. I watched her pull up WestJet. I watched her find the 7:15 a.m. departure from Pearson on December 25th. 2 tickets, Toronto to Victoria. She looked up at me. I nodded once. She pressed confirm. The texts kept arriving. The following Monday, "Mom, just a reminder that homemade rolls really do make a difference. Store-bought always go rubbery by dinner time." Wednesday, "Hey Mom, found a great recipe for elevated butter tart pie if you want to try something different. I can send the link." Friday, "One more thing, the Hendersons mentioned dietary restrictions. Greg doesn't do gluten, Cynthia is dairy-free. Could you keep that in mind for a few of the dishes?" The Hendersons. First time that name had appeared. I asked Elaine who the Hendersons were. She said, "Andrew's managing director and his wife." I sat with that for a moment. This Christmas dinner, the one with a 12-item list, a 7 a.m. start time, and now gluten-free modifications for guests whose names had just appeared, was not a family gathering. It was a professional showcase. Camille wanted to impress Andrew's boss, and she had decided that my wife's hands would be the instrument she used to do it. Elaine was not a mother-in-law being included in Christmas. She was the catering. Each text arrived without a please and with complete certainty. Elaine replied to each one with a single word, "Okay." I asked her once if that was wise. She said, "I'm not stringing her along. I'm just not arguing with someone who isn't listening yet. 33 years of marriage, and I knew that quality of calm. It was the same one she'd had with a difficult parent in a school hallway. Patient, clear-eyed, finished negotiating. The boarding passes were printed and sitting in the dish on my nightstand beside my wallet and my phone. 2 passes. Seats 14C and 14D, 7:15 a.m., December 25th. In every way that mattered, we were already gone. 10 days before Christmas, Elaine drove to Andrew's place to drop off a white cake stand Camille had asked to borrow. She came home 25 minutes later and sat down at the kitchen table without taking off her coat. I knew that look. "What happened?" I said. She told me. The front door had been unlocked. She stepped inside to leave the stand, heard Camille upstairs on the phone, voice carrying clearly. "It's fine. The in-laws are handling all the food. That part's taken care of. I just need the table to look perfect and the rest is sorted. Greg and Cynthia are going to love it." I sat back. In engineering, there's a term for a wall that looks structural but isn't. It defines a space, it plays the part, but it's carrying nothing. The ceiling was never resting on it. You don't find out until you start pulling things apart. That was what Camille had built. A Christmas that looked like a family gathering but was actually a business dinner. Staged for Andrew's managing director. And the element she'd decided was load-bearing. The thing she'd counted on without ever actually asking was my wife. Elaine finally took off her coat. She hung it on the back of the chair and looked at me. "She doesn't think we'll actually do it," she said. "She thinks I'll show up at 7 in the morning because I always have." I said, "Then Christmas is going to be very educational for her." Elaine almost smiled. I got up and put the kettle on. 6 days before Christmas, I called Andrew myself. Elaine had asked me not to. She'd already spoken to him and it hadn't moved anything. But I am his father, and there are things a man needs to hear from his father, especially when he doesn't want to. Andrew answered on the second ring. I kept it short. "Andrew, your mother has been handed a 12-dish list for 18 people with no help and a 7 in the morning start time. She told you it was too much. Nobody heard her. I need you to fix that." A pause. "Dad, I know, but Cam's already got everything planned." Andrew. Another pause. "It's just this one time, we'll all help clean up after." I recognized those words. They had been arranged by someone else, and were waiting at the door when he picked up the phone. "I'm telling you clearly, your mother is not going to be the catering for your wife's Bay Street dinner. Sort it out." He said, "Dad, I really think you're—" "I love you," I said. "Good night." I hung up. Elaine was at the kitchen table when I came back. She looked at my face and read it. "He's not ready yet," she said. "He will be." She nodded slowly. Then she stood and walked to the hall closet. She came back carrying her suitcase. She set it on the bed and looked at it. Then she started to pack. "I want to tell you about an apron before I tell you the rest. It's a green canvas one from a kitchen shop in Niagara-on-the-Lake we'd visited on our anniversary, maybe 12 years ago. I wore it on Sunday mornings when I made pea-meal bacon and eggs. My one reliable contribution to the kitchen. The meal Andrew still talked about whenever he came home. The apron hung inside the pantry door. There was a faded grease mark near the pocket. I'd never gotten around to getting out. The night before Christmas Eve, while Elaine was packing, I went to the kitchen. I took the apron down and held it. I thought about all the Christmases I'd stood in that kitchen with Elaine. 30-some years of them. She ran the kitchen. I was support staff and I accepted that division cheerfully because I knew my limits. I could not chop an onion to any standard she'd recognize, but I could stand beside her for 5 hours and hand her things and refill her coffee and make sure she was not alone. That was the thing Camille had missed entirely. Not just the labor, the company. I folded the apron along its old creases and put it back on the hook. It didn't need to come to Victoria, it belonged here, but it would not be used this Christmas. I turned off the kitchen light and went back to pack. The night before Christmas, after I finished, I came back to find Elaine already sitting at the kitchen table. The notepad was in front of her. She'd written on it days ago. 4 sentences, folded once, left there like something that had already made up its mind. She unfolded it now and smoothed it flat with her palm. I read it over her shoulder. "Andrew, we love you. That hasn't changed and it won't. But we are not able to cook Christmas dinner for 18 people alone. We said so and no one heard us. We're going to see Dorothy. We'll be back the 27th. The kitchen is yours, Mom and Dad." She had added "and Dad" at the bottom in different ink. I hadn't asked her to. She set the note in the center of the table, then reached up to the cabinet and took down the small glass she used every morning for her orange juice, plain, nothing special, and placed it over the note as a weight. We stood there in the kitchen together for a moment, the light on, the house quiet. "We're going to hear about this," I said. "Yes," she said. "Andrew is going to be upset." "Yes." I looked at her 33 years of marriage, and she still had a way of looking back at me that said more than most people could fit into a paragraph. "Ready?" I said. "I've been ready for about 3 weeks," she said. I turned off the kitchen light. She carried her suitcase to the door. I carried mine. We called the Uber together, standing side by side in the front hall, and waited. The driver didn't ask us where we were going at 5:15 in the morning on Christmas Day, which suited us fine. He had a quiet radio station playing, and the heat turned up, and Elaine sat next to me in the back, with her hands in her lap in the stillness of someone who has made their decision, and is now simply letting it happen. Pearson International at 5:45 on Christmas morning has a particular quality. Not empty, but suspended. People moving through it in that specific holiday airport way, exhausted and purposeful at the same time. I bought us both coffees from a vending machine that were aggressively bad. We drank them anyway. Elaine's phone had 4 unread messages from Camille sent after midnight. Reminders, timing notes, a gravy recipe link. Neither of us opened them. At 6:50, they called our boarding group. We stood in line and I thought, right now 18 people are expecting a Christmas dinner to be underway. In a few hours, someone is going to walk into a kitchen and find a note under a juice glass. My phone buzzed as we stepped into the jetway. "Andrew. Hey Dad, heading to pick you and Mom up around 9. Cam wants to get started early. See you soon." He didn't know yet. I put the phone in my jacket pocket. We found our seats. Elaine took the window. The plane pushed back at 7:22, 7 minutes late, which felt entirely appropriate. When the wheels left the ground, Elaine reached over and put her hand on mine. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Dorothy was waiting at Victoria Airport with 2 paper cups of proper coffee and no dramatic reaction whatsoever, which is exactly what you want from a friend of 24 years. She hugged Elaine first, then looked at me. "Gavin, you actually came. Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought Elaine might talk you out of it somewhere over the Rockies." "She tried," I said. Elaine looked at me. "Once," I added. We drove to Saanich with the windows cracked. The air was mild in the way that December in Victoria always manages to be. Cool but not sharp. The kind of air that makes you wonder what the rest of the country is doing to itself. There were things in flower along Dorothy's street that had no business flowering in December, and were doing it anyway. Dorothy's house was small and white with a wisteria vine climbing across the front. Dormant now, but still handsome. A black cat named Figaro acknowledged our arrival from the porch railing and immediately returned to more important business. We took our coffees to the back garden. It faced a small inlet, and the morning light was doing things to the water that Ontario in December simply does not offer. A great blue heron stood on a dock across the channel, with the complete authority of a bird that knows it doesn't have to be anywhere. Elaine's phone lit up on the garden table. Andrew, then Camille, then Andrew again. I turned it face down. Dorothy looked at me. "You know it won't stop. It'll stop when it stops," I said. She handed me more coffee. "I want to tell you what I know of what happened in Toronto that morning, because Andrew told us in pieces over the following days." At 9:04 a.m., Andrew arrived at our house to pick up Elaine. The door was locked. He rang the bell. No answer. He let himself in with his key. The house was dark and quiet and clean the way a house is when people have left it deliberately rather than just stepped out. He walked to the kitchen. On the table, a glass, and under it, a folded piece of notepaper. He read it. He stood for about 40 seconds without moving. Then he called me. No answer. Called Elaine. No answer. He texted, tried the house line on the chance we'd left our phones behind, then called Camille. Camille arrived at 9:30 still in her good coat, already in the mindset of someone managing a large event. She read the note. She stood very still. Then she started calling catering companies. The first one wished her a Merry Christmas and explained that bookings had closed in November. The second had a holiday package requiring 72 hours notice. The third didn't answer. The fourth, Birchwood Catering, a place she'd bookmarked from a food magazine months ago, was fully booked with no Christmas Day availability. She hung up without saying goodbye. Andrew drove to Loblaws at 10:15. The holiday section had been largely picked over. He stood in the meat aisle with a cart and no good options. He came home with a pre-made turkey breast roast, a box of stovetop stuffing, a bag of frozen dinner rolls, a compliments apple pie from the bakery case with a small ding in the box, a pre-assembled cheese tray in plastic wrap, and 2 bottles of wine. He'd remembered at the last moment that Camille had mentioned a cheese board for arrivals. Camille's sister attempted the roasted vegetables from a recipe on her phone. She got a call and forgot to set the oven timer. The kitchen smelled like scorched maple glaze for the rest of the afternoon. At 1 p.m., guests began arriving. The Hendersons came at 1:30, precisely on time, the punctuality of people attending a work-adjacent event who have calculated exactly how long they intend to stay. Andrew's managing director, Greg Henderson, wore a blazer. His wife Cynthia brought a bottle of Okanagan Red and handed it to Camille at the door, with a smile that gave nothing away. The table was genuinely beautiful. Camille had a real eye for arrangement. The linen runner, the white candles, the cedar bough centerpiece she'd ordered from a florist 2 weeks before. She had put real care into how it looked. Then the food came out. The pre-made turkey breast, sliced on her good serving platter, stovetop stuffing in a white bowl, steaming slightly too enthusiastically, frozen rolls, still cool in the center, the cheese tray with the plastic impression still faintly visible in the brie, the apple pie on a cake stand. Cynthia Henderson looked at the spread, set her wineglass down carefully, and said nothing. Camille smiled at the table and said, "We had a last-minute change. My in-laws weren't able to make it." Greg nodded and said, "That's a shame." In the kitchen, Andrew stood at the counter with his back to the room. He had asked his mother to cook for 18 people alone. She had told him plainly it was too much. He had said do it anyway. Standing there, looking at a pre-made turkey breast on his wife's good china, Andrew understood in his body the way things land when they stop bouncing off the surface, what one Christmas dinner had actually meant. In Dorothy's back garden, I was telling a story about a bridge abutment repair I'd overseen out in Simcoe County a few years back. Unremarkable job, terrible mud for 8 weeks straight, when Elaine's phone rang on the table between us. Camille. Elaine looked at the phone, then at me, then at Dorothy. Dorothy looked at her roast chicken. Elaine picked up. "Mom." Camille's voice was a register higher than usual, tight at the edges. "Where are you? Do you know what's happening here right now? Greg Henderson is sitting at our table, and there is nothing ready. You could have at least called." Elaine set her fork down and looked out at the water. "Camille," she said, the same voice she'd used with a difficult parent in a school hallway, unhurried, clear, finished with the negotiation. "I told you I couldn't do this alone. I said it when you sent the list. I said it again at Sunday dinner. Gavin called Andrew directly. No one heard us, so we made a different plan." A silence on the line. "That is incredibly selfish." Elaine said, "We'll be home the 27th. I hope the rest of your evening goes well." She hung up. Dorothy refilled her wine without being asked. 20 seconds later, my phone rang. "Andrew," I answered. He didn't speak right away. I heard him outside, the muffled sound of the gathering behind a closed door, and then just the yard and the wind in the cedar hedge. "Dad." His voice had changed. The defensive edge was gone. What was left was quieter, the sound of a man who has stopped performing and started feeling. I knew it was too much. I kept telling myself it would be fine. I said nothing when I should have said something. He stopped. "I'm sorry, Dad. Tell Mom I'm sorry." I believed him. My son had never been dishonest with me. He had chosen the easier path, stayed quiet to avoid a fight, let things slide because confrontation felt costly. That is a failure of courage, not character. There's a real difference. And I'd made the same failure earlier in this story. He came by it honestly. "I know," I said. "We'll talk when we're home. Go take care of your guests." "Is the food good?" he asked. I looked at my plate. Dorothy's roast chicken, crisp-skinned, deeply fragrant, cooked with the kind of attention that makes simple food taste like a decision. Real mashed potatoes with butter and a little cream, a salad from her kitchen garden, and a BC Pinot Gris that turned out better than its price had any right to suggest. Elaine across the table from me finally relaxed for the first time in 6 weeks, the late afternoon light from the inlet warm behind her. "It's wonderful," I said. "Dorothy made her grandmother's chicken." A pause. Good. I could hear him try to steady himself. Good, Dad. Go, I said. We'll talk Sunday. The Hendersons left at 4. Greg was the kind of man who is unfailingly polite in direct proportion to how well a situation is going. He ate without complaint, complimented the centerpiece, which genuinely deserved it. At some point, Cynthia said quietly to Andrew, "Your parents usually come for Christmas, don't they? Everything all right?" Andrew said they'd had a prior commitment they couldn't move, which was accurate. Camille, from across the table, said there had been a last-minute change of plans. Also accurate, depending on your definition of last minute. The two explanations didn't quite line up. The way improvised accounts don't, when two people are solving the same problem from different angles, without comparing notes first. Camille's sister, toward the end of the evening, looked down the table and said quietly but clearly, "Mel, you should have asked them properly." Camille said, "Don't start." Her sister didn't start, but she held the look level and steady for a moment. The expression of someone who has quietly run out of benefit of the doubt, before going back to her wine. Guests left earlier than a holiday dinner usually ends. There was no warmth built up in the rooms, no smell of anything that had been cooking since morning. Andrew did the dishes. He told us later it was the first time he'd washed up after a large family dinner. That stopped surprising me the moment I thought about it. Elaine had always done it. I'd helped sometimes, but she'd always done it. Standing at the sink, Camille came in and said he should have called us more. He turned off the tap and said, "I did call them. I knew it was too much." A pause. "You knew," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I knew." He turned the water back on. Camille left the kitchen. She didn't post anything to Instagram that evening. Not the centerpiece, not the table, not the food. She'd taken pictures earlier in the day. They stayed in her camera roll. We flew home December 27th. Ontario in late December is a particular kind of gray, not dramatic, just a flat ceiling of cloud over everything that makes you aware you've been somewhere with mild air and winter blooming things. The rideshare pulled into our driveway and Andrew was sitting on the front steps. Not his house, ours. He'd driven from Toronto without calling ahead. That told me he'd thought about it long enough to know a phone call wasn't sufficient. He stood when I came up the walk. We looked at each other. He looked tired in the way people do when they've been honest with themselves about something difficult for the first time, and it cost them sleep. "Camille didn't come," he said. "Okay," I said. We went inside. Elaine had arrived a few minutes ahead of me, and the kettle was already on. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the note had been 4 days before, the same seats we'd occupied for 20 years of Sunday dinners. "I knew it was too much," Andrew said, "and I let it happen anyway. I told myself it wasn't worth a fight. I convinced myself you'd both just manage, and that was all right." He stopped. "It wasn't." "No," I said, "it wasn't." He looked at me. He'd expected more scaffolding around the truth, maybe. I didn't have any to offer him. Elaine put her hand over his on the table. "We love you," she said. "That's not in question, but we will not be made invisible for someone else's convenience, not even for yours." "I hear you," Andrew said. "Good," Elaine said and poured the tea. We sat there for a while without filling the silence. It was the kind of quiet that only settles after something true has been said and actually received. The quiet on the other side of a real conversation, when everyone in the room has stopped performing. It was the best 40 minutes we'd had together in 2 years. "Camille called 3 days into January," I answered. "I want you to know," she said, "that what you did was really hurtful." "Camille," I said, "I understand it felt that way, and I'd like you to understand that when you send someone a 12-item list and call it a family invitation, that's hurtful too. We can talk about this honestly or we can leave it here. Your choice." A silence, then she hung up. She called back 4 days later. This time she asked more than she instructed. She asked how Victoria was. Said it sounded beautiful. Said she'd been thinking. She didn't apologize in those exact words, but she asked questions for the first time since I'd known her, instead of issuing directives, and I recognized that as the closest thing to an opening we were going to get. Elaine took the second call. They talked for 14 minutes. Longer. Elaine told me afterward than they'd ever spoken without Camille handing her a task somewhere in the middle of it. There was no grand resolution, no moment where everyone wept and understood each other perfectly and pledged to become different people. That is not how it works. What changed was more functional than that. An assumption had been removed. The assumption that our time, our energy, our willingness were simply available, indefinitely, on demand, at no cost to anyone. That assumption was gone, and without it, things had to be negotiated, which meant they had to be talked about, which meant everyone had to act like people with actual choices. That was enough. Andrew started calling more, asking instead of informing. Small things that added up. Elaine signed up for a watercolor class at the Burlington Art Center, Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She'd been wanting to for 2 years and had kept putting it off because there was always something someone else needed first. We booked Victoria again for April. Dorothy was already planning which section of the Butchart Gardens would be in full bloom. One Sunday morning, I put on my green apron and made pea-meal bacon and fried eggs, just for the two of us. Elaine poured coffee and sat at the counter, and we did not talk about Camille or Andrew or Christmas or any of it. We just had breakfast. I stood at that stove in that apron with the old grease mark on the pocket, and I thought, this is what it was always supposed to be. The two of us in this kitchen on a Sunday morning, with nowhere in the world we had to be. About a week after we got back from Victoria, Elaine was reorganizing the front hall closet and came across a cardboard box on the top shelf with my handwriting on it, photos, misc. We brought it to the kitchen table and opened it together. The usual archaeology of a shared life. Birthday parties from the 90s. Andrew at age 7, holding a fish with the pride of a man who has accomplished something permanent. A church fundraiser we couldn't quite place in any particular year. Near the bottom, Elaine held up a photograph. It was a Christmas 7 or 8 years ago, based on the kitchen walls before we repainted. She was at the stove. I was standing behind her, arms loosely around her shoulders, my cheek tilted toward her hair. We were both laughing. I don't know at what. The timer was probably going, something in the oven. One of us had said something that landed just right. I didn't remember being photographed, but I remembered the feeling exactly, being there, not watching from a comfortable distance, not stepping in only for the moments that required me and retreating for the rest. Just in it, all of it, because that was where I wanted to be, because she should not have been alone in that kitchen, because she had never once asked me to be there, which made it more important, not less. That was the thing Camille had never understood, and the thing Andrew had forgotten somewhere along the way and had to relearn the hard way. You don't send someone you love a work order. You show up. Elaine put the photograph in a small frame and set it on the kitchen shelf next to the juice glass. We stood looking at it for a moment. We should have gone to Victoria years ago, she said. We were exactly where we should have been, I said, until we weren't. She looked at me. That's very philosophical for a December. I'm a deep man, Elaine. She laughed. And I thought, that is what the 33 years were for. Not to produce Christmas dinners for Bay Street networking events. To produce this, the two of us in our kitchen on an ordinary morning, laughing at something small with nowhere we had to be.